Retirement planning for couples rather than an individual brings in some additional planning points. You'll have incomes, assets, and pension values that are unlikely to be equal between partners. There'll be some tax planning opportunities you could take advantage of, and probably more importantly, very often you'll find two different viewpoints between partners. We typically find that one partner is taking the lead with the finances, and therefore the other partner might feel a little out of the loop, have less understanding, and not be as aware of the options available to them. It's also very common for there to be an age gap between partners, and I'm not necessarily talking about a DiCaprio-style age gulf.
Leonardo DiCaprio attended the premiere, and by the end, his date was too old for him.
No judgment, Leo. But any age gap at all starts to present some additional planning issues. Thank you to Steve, a subscriber who suggested I cover an example such as this. Today we'll have a look at a retirement planning case study for a couple with an age gap, and then I'll pick up on some points that couples in this situation might want to consider. Hi, my name's Andrew. I am a chartered financial planner advising clients in the UK. And if you're new to the channel and like this type of content, tap that subscribe button to help us on the road to 1,000 subs. Let's jump straight into our case study and introduce Pete and Sophie. Pete's age 64 and Sophie 54. We've got a 6-year age gap within this plan, and they've got ONS average life expectancies of 85 and 87. We'll plan out 10 years beyond that for them so that they can have a bit of scope beyond the averages. They've got 3 children, 2 grandchildren as things stand, and Pete is coming to that point of thinking about retirement. He's been self-employed, running his plumbing and heating business, but he's looking to bring that to a close, whereas Sophie is employed, HR manager, and has no immediate plans to cease this. To give an overview of their finances, you can see some of the key figures on screen here. Sophie's going to be earning around £45,000 a year, unless there's any significant changes there. They own their home, the mortgage is paid off. Pete has his self-invested personal pension, which is built up through his contributions over the years out of self-employment income. Sophie's still active in her workplace pension and has some deferred entitlement going back to former employment within local government. They've got a bit of savings, and Pete's got an investment plan. They also have a rental property which Pete has tended to over the years and self-managed. Now, before we get into any financial planning discussions, what if we just defaulted the plan to an age 60 retirement? So that would be Pete retiring immediately and Sophie following on in 6 years when she gets to age 60. And before we get into any detailed discussions about investment risk and their comfort, let's assume they go middle of the road and manage to get a 5% net return on any invested money. Well, in the 6 years run up until Sophie reaches age 60, if Pete doesn't contribute, his SIP is projected to hit around £402,000 at that point in time. And with the 8% contributions that Sophie and her employer are making into her workplace pension, she's projected to land at around £187,000 in her pension pot. If security and the guaranteed source of income was important to them, Sophie and Pete could trade off their pension pots at this point for a lifetime annuity. And based on the values we've projected to here and some assumptions about the annuity terms, Pete could convert his pot to around £17,000 a year of guaranteed inflation-linked income, and Sophie's pot would convert to around £7,200 a year. If they did fully annuitise their pensions, there wouldn't be a great deal left of invested money, but Pete does have his stocks and shares ISA, so if we assume again that they're getting a 5% net return on that money, and with all the other assumptions taken into account, the cash flow system can estimate that from the retirement point when Sophie stops work, they could spend around £45,400 per annum, increasing with inflation, that's in today's money, for the rest of their days. And when both state pensions are in payment, they'd actually have a little bit more they could spend prior to Pete's assumed mortality age of 95. However, if Pete and Sophie decided that rather than trading their pension pots off for a guaranteed income, they were comfortable retaining the pension funds and gradually drawing down on this through income drawdown, then the system has estimated that they could stretch that expenditure figure to £47,700 per annum, albeit with the additional responsibility and some of the risks that go with managing a drawdown plan. With any forward-looking projections, just keep in mind that the one thing we do know is that they will be wrong. We can only make best guess assumptions, and when we talk about linear returns like 5% a year, we know that investment returns are going to be up, down, and different. It needs you to check in annually and revisit the plan and adapt in future. Now, of course, I'm using the financial planning software I've got here. We can stress test that. It's got a few toys to play around with to analyze this, but you can DIY this if you want. Build your own spreadsheet, look at the guaranteed sources of income that you've got, and then plug those gaps by taking money out, withdrawals from your invested pots of money. Just allow for things like taxation. And again, that's going to change. So don't beat yourself up too much about any assumptions. Just bear in mind it's something that you will revisit and adjust as time goes on. If we look at the PLSA's Retirement Living Standards Report, then these projected expenditure figures that we've calculated in the default scenario for Pete and Sophie, it sits just above the moderate lifestyle, which, when you look at what that breaks down at, gives hopefully a bit of reassurance that Pete and Sophie are at least on the right track. They've got scope for Pete to retire now and Sophie to retire at 60, and that's before we get into any further planning discussions. So let's get to some of those financial planning discussions that we could have. If I was sat down with Pete and Sophie as their financial planner, what might we look at? Well, first of all, you might have guessed from the asset split that Pete has really taken the reins when it's come to their finances. Being self-employed, Pete didn't have the default work pension to roll into, so he had to go out and find his own pension, which he took advice on many years ago, but has since transferred to a SIP, picked his own funds, started to do a little bit of research about how you might access that pension in future, and along the way he also picked up a stocks and shares ISA, given the knowledge and experience he was gaining. Now, Pete openly acknowledges he made some mistakes along the way, but all of this have taught him some great lessons. He's got a really good grounding as an investor going into retirement. Sophie has been very happy to leave all of this financial stuff to Pete. She's loved her career, loved raising the family, and always felt that Pete had a good handle on the finances. She didn't really need to check the bank account, hasn't given two thoughts to the pension. I mean, yeah, she joined through work, but didn't need to make investment decisions because there was default funds there. And being honest, she's just not that interested. She's perfectly capable of understanding any of these aspects, but just finds it a bit dull. Now, it would be very common in this type of scenario for Pete to be the one to contact the financial advisor and attend the meeting, or for Pete to go off and DIY these decisions and arrange things with pensions and sort of just relay some of that information as necessary. But whilst Sophie doesn't necessarily have to develop a love for all things financial suddenly, I've yet to meet anybody that doesn't care about their quality of life, how they get to spend their time, where they holiday, whether they can treat the kids and grandkids on birthdays and Christmas, and ultimately whether they're okay financially and they're not going to suddenly run out of money. So if I'm the financial planner that gets to sit down with both Pete and Sophie, we're going to expand that conversation and start to look at questions like, does Sophie want to work to age 60? Now, Pete is due to retire immediately, but this default plan, would have Sophie working for another 6 years. It would be good to get a conversation going as to how comfortable Sophie feels with that. She might absolutely love her job and actually have plans to work beyond that. Does that sit okay with Pete? Would her phasing out of work be more appealing than working 9 to 5 for another 6 years? Pete's going to have all this freedom of time. Is he going to find a sort of lack of purpose whilst he doesn't have the ability to spend as much time with Sophie and no longer has that purpose and identity that goes with having a business and working? Another question that we'll certainly be digging into is, what does a good life and lifestyle look like once you're no longer working. And you'll definitely start to see some divergence between couples on this. It could be a huge gulf, or it might just be minor things. Pete might be thinking about, I don't know, weekends away in the lakes or tinkering around in the garage, a bit of a walk here or there. And Sophie might be thinking more along the lines of plenty of time with the grandkids or cruising around the Med, who knows? But the point is that a lot of this often goes unsaid. When you're working 9 to 5, it sort of masks the fact that you can't really live how you want to. You don't have the free time to spend in that way. But take away the work, take away those hours, give yourself that freedom. And are you actually on the same page as a couple? Now, I'm not trying to drive any wedges here, definitely not. But compromise, discussion, conversation, it can certainly bring you on the same page, and it allows you to build expenditure figures around a lifestyle and a life that you are both happy and comfortable with. Another planning point and discussion to be had centres around the rental property that Pete and Sophie have got within their plan. Now, there's plenty of options, of course, with this, but the key question would probably be, do they want to remain landlords throughout the lifetime of the plan? You won't necessarily know that, but you do want to make an assumption because it's a pretty key factor when it comes to the income that they are assumed to get within this plan. If you sell the property and convert that to liquid assets, you've got some options around investing in pensions, ISAs, etc. But would that give as strong a return as perhaps the rental side would? And then on the flip side, if you do retain the rental property, are they happy being landlords? Are they going to want to do that into their 70s, 80s? Would they want to bring in a management company? If the worst was to happen and Pete lost his capacity, or worse yet, life, would Sophie want to continue in that? So these are discussions that certainly want to be had because it is a key part of the plan. Another of the points we'll certainly be discussing is attitudes towards investing, appetite for investment risk. It is very common for you to see a divergence in opinions, comforts, tolerance, experience when it comes to investing. In our example, we've got Pete, who's had to make his own pension decisions, been through a few market crashes, made a few mistakes, and all of this experience forms his viewpoint on investing. He's pretty comfortable with it. He'd be open to income drawdown and having a fair bit of equity shares underneath his pension. Whereas from Sophie's perspective, just with the less experience, she really sees investing as a bit more akin to gambling. She doesn't particularly feel that comfortable with it and would prefer guaranteed sources of income and cash deposits rather than investing. So having these discussions and getting it out in the open is really important. You want to be having a joined up approach and be on the same page. If Pete just goes off and makes his own decisions for his and Sophie's pensions, invests those, and then the market has a temporary decline and goes down by, say, 20%, is Sophie going to feel aggrieved, worried, troubled? Can Pete convey the message at that point and explain what's happening to keep on the course? As another example of one of the points we'll look over and discuss, we want to talk about their views on family and legacy. Now, Pete and Sophie have 3 children, one still just in the university stage, and 2 grandchildren as it stands. Who knows, maybe more on the way. And you could be at two ends of the spectrum. You could either view it as, well, we worked very hard, we've built up our money, we are going to enjoy our retirement, we're going to spend every last penny on great times, experiences, and if you do get the house, you'll be lucky. Or you could be at the other end of the scale where you're thinking, well, let's help the youngest get through uni and give them house deposits and give the grandchildren plenty of gifts and, I don't know, wedding gifts and all sorts of things during their lifetime, followed by a healthy chunk in the will. Now, of course, you could fall somewhere in between that spectrum, but it is common to see different views on this between couples as to how strongly they feel about supporting the family or enjoying their hard-earned money in retirement. So again, just get those conversations out there and see where the views land. Once you've worked through those important planning discussions and started to get an idea of what good looks like, you can then develop the financial plan with the technical aspects around that. And this is where you're going to start to want to jump into the more numbers and tax type planning. So for example, you're going to want to make sure that you take advantage of the two individuals' tax bands as best you can. You could hold assets in either Pete's name or Sophie's name. And in the default plan, if Pete's retired and not working, whereas Sophie is and earning £45,000 a year, then it's going to make sense for perhaps Pete to hold more assets in his name and make use of his personal allowance. If he doesn't use his full personal allowance, of course, he might be able to transfer some of the unused allowance to Sophie. If Sophie does choose to continue with working, she'll have plenty of scope to top up her pensions. She's only making the default workplace contributions between her and an employer at the minute, so she'll have plenty of scope to make personal contributions to perhaps the workplace pension or a SIP in her name, and they might use some of their savings or invested money to top that up, benefit from the tax relief, and then when they do come to take money later down the line, if they've got more of a balance between their pensions, again, when they're drawing money, they can use the tax-free cash between the two of them, and both of their tax bands can be utilised, as opposed to, say, Pete straying into the higher rate tax band just because all of the money's, say, in his pension, as opposed to having a good balance between couples. Of course, even without any earnings, any individual can contribute £2,880 net to a pension and get £720 in tax relief added to their pot. And when you consider that there might be a gap between stopping work and the state pension coming into payment, you might find that you can then withdraw money from your pension within your personal allowance over and above the tax-free cash without needing to pay any tax at all. And finally, once you've got a plan that is optimised for tax, you're making the most of your allowances, and you've done a projection into the future to look at what you need in terms of expenditure and where that lands, the last piece of the puzzle would be designing an investment strategy that aligns with that. And hopefully you can look at the rate of return needed in order to achieve that. In our model, we can use the tools within the cash flow software to analyse that further. We could look at, well, if we did take a, say, 60% equity approach, what is the probability that they'll be okay on a stress tested basis? Again, all of this is assumptions, but it helps you decide on an investment strategy, one that's aligned with your plan, and then two, hopefully, that both parties in the couple are comfortable with from a comfort and investment risk perspective. Thank you for watching, and thank you to Steve for the suggestion on today's topic. If there's anything you want to see on the channel, let me know in the comments or drop me an email. Planning for couples with an age gap is interesting. It makes financial planning a bit more engaging and fun. You've got differences in viewpoints, and you've got some technical points that you can adjust for. For anybody that's thinking about creating a plan in this scenario, you can create a spreadsheet, DIY this, and try and build a plan, hopefully, that allows you to make clear, sensible decisions. But if you are unsure, if you would like a bit more reassurance from a professional advisor, then seek out somebody that's independent and knows the retirement space. If you would like to look further at working with myself, drop me an email to the contact address that's in the description. And as always, if you've enjoyed today's video, if you wouldn't mind pushing that like button, as it does help with the algorithm in sharing it to a wider audience. And I hope to see you for a future video.